Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive. Ever feel like there's got to be a better, faster way to really get your head around a new topic?
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling, like you're wading through information overload, right?
Totally. But what if I told you that the secret weapon might be something as simple as writing?
Writing, like putting pen to paper.
Exactly. Specifically, we're diving into something called journal writing and how it can be this super sneaky, powerful tool for learning.
We're not just talking about taking notes here. We're talking about how the actual process of writing can, fundamentally change how deeply you understand something.
And that's what we're going deep on today, folks. How to use journal writing as the sort of secret shortcut to get a firmer grasp on a subject way beyond just surface level stuff.
We're after those aha moments, those flashes of insight where it all just clicks.
And get this, a big part of it is about how writing can actually offload some of the mental work.
It's like giving your brain a little extra breathing room.
Mental bandwidth freed up to make deeper connections. But let's be real, we've all scribbled notes before, and it doesn't always magically turn us into experts, right?
Right.
So the research actually suggests there are way smarter and way less smart approaches to using writing for learning.
There's definitely a bit of an art to it.
So let's unpack some of the core thinking about how writing and learning actually connect, starting with some of the early theories.
Okay, so way back when, one of the early perspectives was called the romantic view. This idea basically says that the simple act of putting your thoughts into words, that's learning happening right there.
You're making the invisible visible, almost.
Thinkers like Vygotsky and Britton were big on this. The theory is that deep down, we have a lot more knowledge than we realize.
Yeah.
It's just not all nicely organized up there in our conscious minds.
So just getting it out on paper helps bring those thoughts into focus.
Precisely. Britton even had this great term for it, shaping at the point of utterance. Like the thought literally takes shape as you write.
Wow, I like that.
And the idea is that this struggle to articulate your thoughts, that in itself creates the kind of mental effort that's directly building knowledge.
So it's almost like automatic knowledge construction.
That's the heart of the romantic view. Just letting your thoughts flow, not swaying the perfect grammar or structure, that's where the learning magic happens.
That sounds almost too good to be true.
Well, there's another side of the story. Enter what's called the classic view. And this perspective throws a bit of a wrench in the works.
Lay it on me.
Early researchers like Flower and Hayes and Bereiter and Scartamalia, these folks saw writing as, well, more of a heavy lift.
More like a mental workout.
Exactly. They saw it as this complex problem-solving activity. And for folks who aren't already super strong writers, it can really drain your mental energy.
Okay, so it's not just about expressing yourself freely. There's more strategic thinking involved.
Much more. Hayes and Flower actually did these fascinating studies where they had people think aloud as they were writing.
Literally talking through their thought process.
Yep. And it showed how goal-oriented writing really is. You're constantly making decisions, coming up with plans, figuring out how to put those plans into words, and then revising.
So there's a lot going on under the hood.
A whole symphony of cognitive processes. And Bereiter and Scartamalia took this even further. They said, when you're writing, you're basically juggling two different spaces in your mind.
Okay, two spaces. Tell me more.
First, there's the content space, which is like all your knowledge about the topic, the what you know part.
Makes sense.
And then there's the rhetorical space. This is more about your awareness of your writing goals, the structures, the formats, the how to communicate this effectively part.
Ah, so it's like the what and the how.
And they argued that learning happens as you go back and forth between these two spaces, picking information from your content space and trying to fit it into this rhetorical framework.
It's almost like translating your knowledge into a language that makes sense on paper.
Yeah, and they gave examples of specific writing tools that force you to do this kind of mental translation. Things like using metaphors, structuring an argument logically, that kind of thing.
So it's not just making your thoughts visible, it's actively transforming them through these writing structures.
They called this knowledge transforming. The way you restructure, deepen your understanding as you try to put it into words.
Okay, so we've got the romantic view, all about free expression, and the classic view, emphasizing structure and form. But which one is right?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The research actually throws a bit of shade on both of these views on their own.
Really?
Yeah. The classic view, while it sounds good in theory, can be really tough for beginners, for folks who aren't already strong writers.
Like, imagine a student trying to write their first research paper. That's daunting enough without worrying about complex writing structures.
Exactly. So it's questionable whether focusing super heavily on those aspects actually helps you learn the subject matter deeply, especially at first.
And what about the romantic view? Is just free-flowing writing really enough to spark deep understanding?
The evidence there isn't as rock solid as you might think either. There was this one study where they looked at university students who were keeping these learning journals.
With no real guidance or anything?
Very minimal guidance. And the researchers were surprised to find that, well, not a whole lot of actual knowledge building was happening in those journals.
So just writing for the sake of writing isn't a learning guarantee.
Not necessarily.
Hmm.
And when they looked closer, the learning that did happen was strongly linked to how much the students were actually, thinking hard as they wrote, how much mental processing was going on.
Ah, so there has to be some intentionality there, some effort.
Right. And to zoom out even further, there was this huge study that analyzed a ton of different research on writing to learn activities.
Kind of like a mega study.
Yep, a meta-analysis. And they found that on average, these activities had a small to medium effect on academic achievement.
Small to medium. That's not exactly the learning revolution we were hoping for.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But here's the really cool part. That same study found something amazing about those writing tasks that included specific prompts to get students thinking about their own understanding.
Prompts that force you to reflect on what you know and what you don't.
Exactly. And those tasks were almost twice as effective. Like, significantly more learning was happening.
So it's not just about the writing itself, it's about how it makes you think about your own thinking.
That seems to be the key. The researchers were convinced that the real magic is in getting people to actively think about their learning while they're writing. And that brings us to what's known as the self-regulation view, in writing to learn.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. So how does journal writing fit into this self-regulation idea?
In this approach, we're using journal writing as our tool. It's not just summarizing or rehashing information. It's about really grappling with what you're learning, pinpointing those spots where you're confused, and then figuring out how to clear up those misunderstandings.
So you're kind of acting as your own tutor in a way.
Exactly. And that naturally involves using different learning strategies, organizing the material, explaining it in your own words, all while keeping tabs on how well you're understanding it.
It's like a feedback loop of learning, identifying gaps, and then actively trying to bridge those gaps.
And what's cool is that, like the romantic view, it's really driven by your own interests, what you choose to focus on, what questions you ask. But unlike the classic view, it doesn't force you into any particular writing structure.
So no pressure to write a perfect essay.
We call this the genre-free principle. It's all about content and process, not conforming to some rigid format.
Sounds liberating. But we talked earlier about how just writing freely doesn't always translate to deep thinking. How do we ensure that's happening in this journal writing?
That's where those prompts come in. Remember that big study we talked about, the one that showed prompts almost doubled learning outcomes?
Yeah, I remember.
So the self-regulation view takes that finding and runs with it. It combines this free, self-directed writing with systematically prompting those self-reflection processes.
It's like giving your thinking a little nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. It's providing scaffolding, but without stifling that natural exploration that's so important in journal writing.
And you've connected this to something called the Effort Monitoring and Regulation Framework, or EMR.
Yeah, that's a broader framework that looks at how we track and adjust our effort when we're learning. And journal writing with prompts, it really tackles one of the core questions of EMR.
Which is?
How to optimize our mental effort when we're learning independently. How to make sure we're using our cognitive resources effectively.
So it's about working smarter, not harder. And you said there are a couple of big reasons why this kind of journal writing holds so much promise.
Right. First of all, just the act of writing stuff down, that itself is super beneficial.
More than just a memory aid.
When you put your thoughts into words, you're externalizing them. And that actually takes some of the pressure off your working memory. Frees up space for that metacognitive reflection, that thinking about your thinking that we've been talking about.
So it's like taking a mental load off so you can do the deeper processing.
And those written thoughts, they can also act as feedback. When you go back and reread what you've written, it can trigger new ideas, new connections.
It's like having a conversation with your own understanding, seeing it evolve on the page.
That's a great way to put it. And the second big reason, this ties back to that genre-free principle we talked about. Because learning journals don't have all these strict writing rules, they free you up from spending mental energy on those aspects.
You're not getting bogged down in the mechanics of writing itself?
A learning journal entry might not be a literary masterpiece, but it can be incredibly valuable to the person who wrote it because their focus was on the learning, on the thinking.
And you've even compared this to the goal-free effect in learning theory.
Yeah, there's this interesting finding that sometimes having a very specific goal can actually hinder the learning process. Like if you're trying to solve a math problem and you're only focused on getting the right answer, you might miss out on understanding the deeper concepts.
So it's about focusing on the journey, not just the destination.
Similarly, with writing, if your main goal is producing a perfectly polished piece, you might not be engaging in the kind of thinking that leads to real understanding.
Okay, so we've got a good sense of why journal writing can be so effective. But what are the actual mental activities we should be aiming for as we're doing it?
That's where we get into the nitty-gritty of what we call germane processing. These are the cognitive and metacognitive strategies that research has shown are crucial for deep learning.
And you use the term strategies deliberately because these are intentional actions we can take while we're writing.
Exactly. So on the cognitive side, the two biggies are organization and elaboration.
Break those down for me.
Organization is all about identifying the main ideas, seeing how different concepts connect, and structuring information in a way that makes sense to you. Elaboration is digging deeper, generating examples, using analogies, thinking critically about what you're learning.
So it's moving beyond passively absorbing information to actively making sense of it.
And research shows these two strategies are essential for meaningful learning. They help you build connected understanding, integrate new information with what you already know, which leads to better recall, deeper comprehension. Because they're directly contributing to learning, we consider them germane processes.
Okay, and what about on the metacognitive side? Thinking about our own thinking.
That's where journal writing can be particularly helpful. You're engaging in strategies like monitoring and regulation.
Monitoring and regulation. Give me an example.
As you're writing, you might realize, hey, I can't really explain this concept clearly, or I'm drawing a blank on a good example. That's your brain monitoring your comprehension.
It's like a little mental alarm bell going off.
Exactly. And if you notice those gaps, the next step is regulation. That's planning and using strategies to fix those gaps. Maybe rereading a section, looking for more information, trying to explain it differently.
So it's this constant cycle of understanding, identifying misunderstandings, and actively trying to overcome them.
And this ability to self-monitor and self-regulate, that's a hallmark of effective learners. And research has shown some pretty remarkable results when people are prompted to use these strategies during journal writing.
You mentioned a study that looked specifically at the power of prompts.
Yeah, this one was a mini meta-analysis, focused specifically on studies that used prompts to encourage both cognitive and metacognitive strategies. And it found a big positive effect in favor of the prompted approach.
Compared to just letting people write freely.
Yep. And the effect size was almost double what they found for just prompting metacognitive strategies alone in that earlier mega study we talked about.
So the combination of those two types of prompts is where the magic happens.
It seems so. This really highlights the strength of the self-regulation view. It's not just about freedom or structure. It's about finding the right balance, that sweet spot where the open-ended nature of the writing is supported by this intentional guidance.
Okay, so prompts are clearly a big deal. But how do we use them effectively? There's got to be more to it than just throwing any old prompts at someone.
You're right. And that's been a key focus of our research. We've done a whole bunch of studies looking at how to provide this kind of instructional support in a way that maximizes the learning benefits of journal writing.
So things like what kind of prompts to use, when to give them, how to combine them.
Exactly. We've worked with students of different ages, in different subjects, using a range of methods.
And how do you actually measure whether these different approaches are working?
Well, one way is by analyzing the journal entries themselves, looking for evidence that students are using those learning strategies we talked about. Are they summarizing, explaining, organizing, identifying problems, and planning how to fix them?
So it's like looking for those mental fingerprints.
Exactly. And of course, we also measure how much they're actually learning through tests and assessments. So what are some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, what have you learned about using prompts effectively?
Well, one of the most consistent findings is that prompts really do make a difference. When we prompt for elaboration, we see more detailed explanations in the journals. When we prompt for organization, we see more structured thinking.
So they're guiding the mental processes in a measurable way.
And that increased use of these strategies generally translates to better understanding of the material.
Okay, so prompts work. But as you said, it's not just about any prompts. You've also looked at how to combine different types.
Right. Do we focus on prompts that get you thinking about the content? Prompts that get you thinking about your own learning? Or a mix of both? Early on, we found that prompts related to the content were helpful, and a combination of both types was also good.
What about just metacognitive prompts, ones that just get you thinking about your learning?
Those, on their own, weren't always as effective. But we discovered that if those metacognitive prompts included asking students to plan how they would address their learning difficulties, and they had a chance to put those plans into action, then those prompts could be super effective.
So it's not just about noticing you're confused, it's about having a plan of attack.
Exactly. And the most successful approach seems to be the one that combines all three types. Content-focused prompts, prompts for monitoring your understanding, and prompts to plan how to deal with those gaps. It's like you're activating all the important pieces of that self-regulated learning puzzle.
A comprehensive approach. Now, what about the order in which you give these prompts? Does that matter?
That's a question we've been exploring more recently. Does it make a difference whether you start with content-related prompts or metacognitive prompts?
So, like, should you try to organize information first, or should you first figure out what you're struggling with?
Our thinking was that maybe focusing on what you don't understand first might help you build a stronger foundation before you dive into organizing and explaining the material.
So what did you find?
Our study suggests that starting with those metacognitive prompts, the ones that get you thinking about your own learning, seems to lead to better quality in both the content-related thinking and the self-reflection that shows up in the journal entries.
And does this translate to better learning?
Yes, students who start with those metacognitive prompts also tend to score better on tests. It seems like by tackling those knowledge gaps first, they're better equipped to then organize and elaborate on the material more effectively.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you've also talked about the power of showing students examples of good journal entries. How does that work?
Yeah, so in learning theory, there's this well-established idea called the worked example effect. Showing people how something is done correctly can be a really powerful learning tool. And it becomes even more effective when learners try to explain those examples to themselves. We've been looking at how to apply these principles to boost the quality of learning journals.
So you're not just telling them to write, you're showing them what good writing looks like in this context.
Right. We might give them an example of a well-written journal entry on a different topic, something that demonstrates how to respond effectively to the prompts they'll be getting. Sometimes we even ask them to analyze why that example is effective, how it addresses the prompt.
So they're not just passively observing, they're actively engaging with the example.
Exactly. And we've found that this can be really helpful. Studies have shown that students who explain a good learning journal example to themselves, they end up using more detailed explanations in their own journal writing later on, even when they're writing about a different topic.
So it's like they're internalizing those good practices. And you've also found that the timing of when you provide these examples matters.
Yeah, giving the examples early on seems to be more beneficial for learning, which is in line with what we know about the power of early worked examples in other learning contexts.
It's like setting the stage for success. Now, you also mentioned this idea of self-management effects in learning.
Yeah, this is a newer way of thinking about how people can become better at navigating learning situations. We've been reinterpreting some of our findings on worked examples and what we call informed training through this lens.
Okay, break that down for me. How does this relate to journal writing?
So we're arguing that showing those worked examples of journal entries, it's not just teaching about the topic of that example. It's also teaching you how to learn effectively through journal writing. It's giving you the skills to manage your own learning process with this particular tool.
So you're not just learning about, say, the immune system, you're learning about how to use journal writing to learn about any subject.
Precisely. And similarly, when we do what we call informed training, which is basically explaining why certain learning strategies are helpful, that also helps people effectively use prompted journal writing. It's about equipping them with the meta-level knowledge to manage their own learning.
So it's giving them the tools and understanding to get the most out of it themselves.
And we know that as people become more knowledgeable, the kind of support they need changes. Have you ever had that experience where too much help actually becomes a hindrance?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Once you start getting the hang of something, too much guidance can feel stifling.
Right. And there's research showing that this happens in learning too. As people become more expert, too much guidance can backfire. So we've also looked at how to adjust the level of guidance over time, how to fade those prompts as learners become more skilled at using the strategies on their own.
It's like taking off the training wheels.
Exactly. And one of the things we found is that if you keep prompting the same strategies over and over again, it can actually become less effective in the long run.
Makes sense. At some point, you internalize those strategies.
Right. You don't need that external reminder anymore. We've seen that fading those prompts gradually as learners demonstrate that they're using the strategies well on their own leads to better long-term use of those strategies and better learning outcomes.
So it's about finding that balance between support and independence.
Absolutely. And we've also found that tailoring the prompts to the individual's level of expertise, that can make a big difference. What helps a beginner might not be helpful for someone more advanced. Sometimes giving random prompts can even be worse than giving no prompts at all.
So it's about personalized support, meeting learners where they're at. You've also looked at how this applies differently to different age groups.
We've seen that prompts that work well for university students might not be as effective for younger learners. Younger students might need more specific, concrete suggestions on how to use the strategies, more hand-holding, so to speak.
And finally, what about feedback? Does that play a role?
Yeah, we've looked at how giving feedback on the quality of those learning strategies in the journal entries, how that affects things. And we found that for students who are struggling, detailed feedback can really help. But for students who are already doing well, that same feedback can actually backfire. It can hinder their learning.
Wow, that's so interesting. Feedback needs to be targeted, just like those prompts. Now, throughout this whole conversation, we've been talking about the thinking involved in learning. But we know that motivation is a huge part of the equation, too. How does all of this, especially the prompting, affect how motivated people are to learn?
That's a really important point. And honestly, what we found is a bit of a mixed bag. So on the one hand, yeah, prompting those deeper thinking processes, that can definitely boost understanding.
Yep, there's a catch.
There can be.
Yep.
Some students have reported feeling less motivated to do the journal writing over time, maybe because it just feels like more work when you're consciously trying to use those prompted strategies.
It's like, okay, this is good for me, but it's also more effort.
Right. But here's the good news. When that prompted journal writing leads to better understanding, it can actually increase interest in the topic itself.
So maybe a bit less love for the writing task, but more love for the subject matter.
It can be a trade-off, yeah. But we've also found ways to try to counteract those dips in motivation for the writing itself. One thing that's shown promise is prompting students to think about why the material is personally relevant to them, why it matters, why it's useful.
So connect it to their lives, their goals.
Exactly. That's been shown to increase both their willingness to do the journal writing and their motivation to learn the content.
It's not just an abstract exercise anymore. And you've also looked at how the overall learning environment can impact motivation.
Yeah, we've seen that creating a learning environment that emphasizes personal growth and improvement rather than competition and performance, that tends to be more motivating for this kind of activity. And it leads to better learning outcomes too.
So it's about fostering that growth mindset. Okay,
Huh.
we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the main takeaways about using journal writing for learning, especially based on this self-regulation view?
Well, the big headline is that journal writing, when it's done thoughtfully, with the right kind of support, it's incredibly powerful.
It's a tool for taking control of your own learning.
Exactly. That open-ended nature gives you the space to process information in a way that makes sense to you. But adding structure through prompts, that's what really unlocks the potential. Prompts that encourage you to organize, explain, reflect, plan your learning.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Things like showing examples, gradually fading the guidance, those are crucial too. And it all has to be done with a mindful awareness of the motivational side of things.
If you can make the learning relevant, if you can focus on your own progress, you're much more likely to stick with it and see the benefits.
It's not just about writing more, it's about writing smarter.
And while there's always more to learn, the research so far is pretty compelling. This approach to journal writing can be a game changer for learners of all ages, in all kinds of contexts.
So to all our listeners out there, as you're tackling your next learning challenge, think about how you might apply some of these principles. Maybe start by simply reflecting and writing on what you already know and what you're hoping to learn. Where are the gaps?
That's a fantastic starting point. And then think about how you can actively process that information. Organize your thoughts on paper. Explain those concepts in your own words, and most importantly, check your own understanding.
Play the role of both teacher and student.
And don't be afraid to experiment with prompts. Even if you're creating them yourself, those little nudges can really guide your thinking in powerful ways.
We encourage you to check out the research we've been discussing if you want to go deeper, or just sit with these ideas and think about how they might change the way you take notes, the way you process information, the way you learn. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.